All right, folks, it is time for a gem, and then this just indispensable interview with the great Adolph Reed Jr. But first, David Griscom, what do we got?
Yeah, so this week I really wanted to talk about microfinancing and specifically microcredit. Some folks might be familiar with this. It was a major fetish. It's basically been a fetish of a lot of development economics for like 30 years now. The idea is that people in poor and deprived communities from around the world, they're not, poor and deprived because of capitalism or imperialism or American exploitation. They're poor because they just haven't been incorporated well enough into the international finance system. So what happens is people are basically given, small loans for small amounts of money, maybe to us, so that they can start their own business, right? But what often happens is that people are not able to make the payments. They're putting up a very small amount of collateral, which is very dear to them, and then they end up finding themselves massively in debt with no real economic advancement. There's been some major scandals with this. In 2007, Mexico's largest microcredit bank was found to be seriously profiteering off of microcredit. They were charging people rates that were near 100% annually for very small loans. So the idea behind microcredit is very neoliberal, is that we can create all these different kinds of entrepreneurs in economically deprived communities. Essentially, they want to give people credit so that they can buy goods, hopefully very cheaply, and then sell them very high. But if you do that in a community that doesn't have a lot of economic activity, where a lot of people are very poor, it does not create a lot of opportunity. What happens is, if it's successful, the person who's selling those goods now drives out all of the other small people, all the other small business owners, which basically in its best case scenario just means that, some person creates a business and creates a few jobs, but then the equal amount of people end up losing their jobs. So that it's sort of like a net zero gain, right? It just is a transfer of one person being able to have a little bit of money versus another. What often happens, though, is that people are not able to make these payments, and that there is massive, devastation, and money is just extracted from already very poor communities. So imagine, a small community that's been devastated by imperialism and colonialism. Now there's not a lot of economic activity. Now this is a great way for the international finance system to be able to suck out the last little bit of economic assets that belong to these small communities. The reason I want to talk about this is because I read a really upsetting story over the weekend, which is in Washington Post. I highly suggest people check it out, called The Migrant Debt Cycle. And it tells a story about a small town in Guatemala where people frequently are going into debt to pay human smugglers to get into the United States. Now, obviously, this is illegal, but the institutions there are very aware of what's happening and are approving a significant amount of them. One of the whistleblowers who came out and spoke to the reporter said that they think about 30% of their daily operations are actually giving people, these small loans that they're giving to human smugglers. Now, this creates a really horrible cycle of debt. One, just so people can understand the kind of money we're talking about. People are paying like $12,000 to get smuggled into the United States. What happens oftentimes is they try to get into the United States. They've put up everything that they have back home to be able to fund, getting into the United States. Then they get deported. So what often happens is people double down. So then they pay a smuggler again, and then they'll encourage family members to take out a loan so that they can pay the smuggler again to get them back into the United States. Now, the reason that they're doing this, as we all know, is because when you have massive amount of capital flows into the United States from the rest of the world, that creates massive human flows because people need to be able to find money to support their lives. In Guatemala, workers are going to make 7 times as much more if they're working low-wage jobs in the United States than they can in their communities. So what's happening here is, massive amounts of debt, massive amounts of profiteering on the backs of some of the most marginal people. And, if you go into these towns in Guatemala, they're peppered with ads for these businesses. I mean, it's a really cynical abuse of people who desperately need help. And it also shows the fundamental failure of the neoliberal model of development, focusing so much on the individual and the responsibility of the individual rather than a collective understanding of economics and how to create a community that can thrive, just creates more systems of debt. So the idea here, the hope here in this best system is that you're giving someone an opportunity to start a small business. And if they fail, well, that's on them. as we see across the board, the conditions are not viable for most people to be able to take advantage of these loans, and they just find themselves in debt. If we wanted to have a real radical economic platform, it would definitely be about community investment rather than trying to focus so much on the individual and the atomized version of politics that we're seeing pushed onto the rest of the world. When you see these stories, this desperately is the crisis of capitalism and imperialism, and it's something that we desperately need to be getting rid of in liberal circles as an idea of a way that helps out the globe, because what's really creating is a lot of pain and suffering. And just real quick, a lot of people in this field actually are very much like terrorized by the NGOs and the social apparatus that really tries to push microlending as a solution for poverty, that it's really understudied the economic effects of it. So you get a lot of like really messed up reports that are, praising it, but it's not talking about all the damage that's going on in Africa and in Latin America and in India.
Absolutely. Look, the Clinton Global Initiative is all over microcredit. What more do you need to know? You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.